Hi, everybody. On this beautiful afternoon. It's very impressive that you're here. And I'm delighted to be here, having known and admired Richard and his work for, quite a number of years now. And of course, the sheer impact of this image, which you can see on the screen behind me, is quite extraordinary, isn't it, when you arrive at the Warr Pavilion? I mean, it's like no experience I've ever had here before. And of course, we're dealing with a building that's an iconic masterpiece from the 1930s by Shemeyev and Mendelssohn, one of those buildings that really did announce for pretty much the first time that modernist architecture had arrived in Britain. So you're dealing with a highly listed building. And what does Richard do with it? Wow. He puts a coach on top of it, which not only juts out from the side of the building, but threatens to plummet downwards. But then, of course, it sort of rears upwards again and does a kind of defiant act in front of us. A most extraordinary thing to look at, not only in terms of initial impact, but also in terms of how it kind of develops in front of your eyes and you can think about it. And I'm sure that people who live down here must have a different take on it every time they see it, which is great. But perhaps I could start, Richard, by asking you, when you were invited, presumably, to do something for the roof of the pavilion here, how soon was it before this extraordinary idea leapt into your mind?
Yes, well, going back into the history of the invitation, the late Alan Hayden had invited me to think about following on from Anthony Gormley and doing the second rooftop commission for the Warr Pavilion. And it wasn't that Alan had planned that it should be an annual event. It just seemed the second one was ready to do, and there'd been a couple of years lapsed between Anthony and myself. And what I knew first off is that on the visit down here, I didn't want to use the same space as Anthony had used, which is the terraced roof area. I wanted to take on another part of the roof and talk about that as being part, associated with the building. Lovely, thanks. And I started to sort of investigate the building and its sum of parts. And what started to really attract me was that looking at the architecture, I became more interested in the edges of the building, the sum of edges that make up the building, as opposed to the sum of planes that make up the building.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wanted to do in some way with the edge, and it was a very formal thought to begin with. You come from the land, and it's where land meets sea, and it's where sea meets the sky. So it was very much about these horizontals at this kind of point in the southern UK. So from that very formal beginning, I started to then think about the edge as something that needed announcing, something to teeter on the edge, something to sort of sit there, so a kind of a structural daring that would cause you to look at the building.
Yeah.
And the first thing that started to produce the idea was that on the north side of the building, which is seldom photographed, if you go onto Google and then you go to images of the Warr Pavilion, they're all from the seafront looking at the building. They don't look at the car park and the entrance and the kind of where the goods entrance happens to be. They don't photograph it. But on that side of the building, as you'll see, and as you know, is that lovely cantilevered window, north window.
Yes.
So that idea of that structural daring, of that north window cantilevered, started to make me think about cantilevering something. I thought, I must do something like the coach in the Italian Job. I want to do something that teeters on the edge and you stare up. And then
And why was the idea of the coach in the Italian Job so readily in your mind? Because we're talking about a film that came out, way back when?
69, I think.
Yeah, 1969.
I think once I'd fastened on the idea that, in fact, it had to be the coach, it started to make a lot of sense. By that time, the Olympic body had contacted the Warr Pavilion. This is jumping up to recent times now. And had sort of suggested that maybe we'd be part of the Cultural Olympiad down on the south coast. So I started thinking of the coach as being some sort of flag waving for the Olympics. And ironically and fantastically, the coach in the film, this iconic film, was a red, white and blue coach. So it was a Union Jack. So the coach started to become a flag to wave for our GB team.
And not only that, there was the Olympic phrase, going for gold.
Going for gold, absolutely. I mean, in '69, these guys were going for gold, and, our Team GB were going for gold as well. So it was all beginning to make a lot of sense. It was an iconic film on an iconic building, the building becoming a form of plinth for the sculpture, but they were somehow, united. And they were causing people to look at the building in a very, very different way. And it was talking about the edge. It was also, I think, talking about not just the kind of limits at which you can go with your own ideas, but the kind of limits that our Olympiads were going to as well. Mm-hmm. The difference between winning and losing. The difference between being balanced and losing balance and falling off.
Yeah. Teetering.
Teetering. The idea that you can really push an idea, a sculptural idea, to a limit, and how far you can go before the idea fails. So there was all these kind of little metaphors that were playing to make up the summer parts which became that coach. And it's a sort of an image that everyone would recognise. So it seemed poignant and pertinent at this year of 2012, with the Olympics taking place in the UK, to have something that everyone recognised.
There may well not be people in the audience who have seen the film in this extraordinary moment at the end. Can you just summarise what it was about it that really stuck in your mind? Because I think you saw it, goodness me, you think probably at the Regal Hammersmith?
It probably was something like the Regal Hammersmith when I was a kid.
When you were a teenager?
When I was a teenager, 69, what would I have been? I would have been an early teenager, a fantastic film. Only the Brits can put together Benny Hill, Michael Caine, Noel Coward. It's an unheard of thing in Hollywood. And it was, for those who don't know, it's quite simply, it was a heist. The robbers were going to go out and take the gold that was due to go to Fiat's factory in Turin. And they do it through dressing up as, football fans, because there's a big match on at the time. And they managed to get the gold and escape out of Turin city in minicars. And the minicars are then loaded into the back of the coach on a motorway. And, they've got away with it. The Brits have done it. We've got the Italian gold and we're on our way home. And of course they're celebrating going up through the Alps, and the coach skids off the road, and it's that lovely British ending to films, which is the what if situation. We've done so well in getting the gold, and then they go and lose it to this moment, and you're left in suspension, like the coach is in suspension over the precipice.
But it was actually a very daring and unconventional way for a film to end, wasn't it? Particularly a highly commercial film like that, because the danger would have been that audiences would storm out saying, hang on a minute.
Yeah. Well, I think, interestingly, before the film was finalised, there was plans for a sequel. And so this was a very clever way in which you can pick up. Because no one knows the finish, it's not decided upon. You've made your own decision on it. So the next film the second film, the sequel, would have started post that situation.
Yes, oh, absolutely, yeah. And of course there's another meaning to it as well, inevitably, isn't there? Because we're talking 2012, and the few years that have led up to this Olympic year have been intensely difficult, not to say traumatic, in terms of the economy. Not just Britain, of course, but across the world. And I think myself, more and more when I see this piece, that it does have, and surely in your imagination it does too, doesn't it? It does have a bearing on that.
Well, I have mentioned it in terms of sort of ideas that connected to recognising the work. I saw it as, if you imagine the film particularly, where the gold is teetering over the edge. We don't actually have gold in this coach. It's not necessary to put the gold in there. You wouldn't see it anyway. But there was a sort of sense of comment about the kind of precariousness of our financial situation at the moment, that things were in limbo. One didn't know which way it was going to go. And I think that was kind of a sort of a hidden meaning beneath all the others. It wasn't one I openly declared, but I like the way that people can seize upon that interpretation as well and think about that.
Absolutely. So where are you planning to put it next, Richard? Maybe on the roof of the Bank of England?
Well, it's an interesting question because although one conjured the idea for this building, it's not strictly site dependable, and my kind of reputation is built on early works of site specificity, but in a lot of cases...
Some of which we'll see in a moment.
Yeah, that's a misinterpretation, because not all works need necessarily that site. You know, I mean, our dear great sponsor, Eddie Izzard, really wants it to stay in Bexhill, not necessarily on the roof. It's possible for it to, you know, have plans to remain on the south coast. It's possible at the same time to allow it to sort of do festival tours, or even, you know, work within a programme of touring.
Could go around the country, couldn't it?
It could do. It could go abroad. I mean, I'd like to take it to the Venice Biennale. You know, I think take it back to Italy and put it there over the Grand Canal would be fantastic.
The Italian job, it's perfect, isn't it?
But ideally, you know, because obviously one wants to sort of, you know, make a living out of being an artist, and so far I've done well enough to be able to do that. It would be good to perhaps, you know, have someone, either a private buyer or a museum, somewhere. The only thing is, it makes so much sense down here on the south coast. I mean, it's actually another sort of connotation that takes me back to my boyhood. I used to come to Pevensey Bay nearly every year as a kid with my parents for holidays.
Well, that's very new here, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very much that sort of end of the pier ride. I mean, when I was a kid, there'd be those kind of things, like on bits of hydraulic that would just crank backwards and forwards, and you'd sit on them and ride on them outside the kind of candy floss store. So in a way, it's poignant to the region. It's got that rather faded colour, as if the sun has bleached it in some way.
Yes, yes, it's definitely got a fairground kind of element to it.
It's got that sort of south coast feel.
Yeah,
the coach ride down to Bexhill.
Yeah.